Huron. Okay. You just
Okay.
tell us a little bit about your.
Let me go ahead and set the picture here because I found out about that I was going to do this less than 2 months ago.
Okay.
And I decided, I knew a little about that International Harvester was involved in it, but I had no idea of the extensive degree that it was involved. I had an M1 rifle that was made by International Harvester when I went through basic training back in 1961. And so I didn't know a lot about it, but I said I would be glad to put up a military display. I've been collecting for years and years and years. Anyway, I told him I'd do it, and so I started researching it, and this is what I found that much out about it. This is so expansive and so diverse and just overwhelming for a 2-month period of time to put this together that I'm just starting to learn about it, but it's becoming a big deal. And there are just so many vehicles, there's so many pieces of equipment, rifles, parts of rifles, you name it, they made things like, just examples, scrapers, of course, they made trawlers, they made tractors, they've even made tanks, believe it or not. They made M1 rifles, like I mentioned. That was basically during the Korea that they made those. But it's just, there's all kinds of things. And I've tried to lay out in this short time just examples of some of the vehicles. You can see all kinds of vehicles here. Here's half-tracks, here's a dump truck. This is clear back in World War I, where they were already began becoming involved. This picture here was from 1917. Here's an example of scrap drive, for example, beginning of World War II. Everybody got into it. And this is the thing about International Harvester that I found out. Everything they did during World War II was involved with the war effort. Everything they did. They shut down everything else except the war effort. Of course, because a lot of the employees had gone into the service, that meant that the women had to take over the responsibility of the production line. And my goodness, did they take it over. They did a beautiful, wonderful job. And I'd like to show you, let me back up here just a second. Here's an example. This is Rosie the Riveter. And IH is a perfect example of Rosie the Riveter. This picture was done of Rosie by Norman Rockwell back in 1943 to show an example of a woman that had taken over responsibility that you wouldn't expect a teeny little woman to take over. And she is a typical example of a production line. And there's pictures along here that show women making torpedoes, for example, and welding and things of this nature. And that was typical. I mean, that's not an exception. That's a typical. Let's keep going. Here's some pictures of just absolutely, the parking lots are full of vehicles that they made. Trawlers, cranes, just all kinds. Here's trucks. There's things. They were in research and development, for example. And that's an example of that picture there. Half tracks were a big thing. Here's a list of just some of the things that they did make. And that's just touching the surface of it. They didn't make aircraft, but they made aircraft parts. They made like generators and things of this nature. This is a prime mover that was used to pull big field artillery pieces during the period. They didn't make the helmet, but they made the tank of the guy that was riding around it. And this is an example of one of the crawler type tractors that they made. This particular one is of a later vintage, but as the sign says here, they've made all kinds of different crawlers in all kinds of different colors. Soldiers, examples here of World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and of course they're still continuing to make things today. They didn't make the bazooka, but they made the ammunition that went into the bazooka. M1 rifle, Korean War, they made 336,623 of those things. The Korean War. Here's a picture of the gals putting torpedoes together. Of course, they were real big on making sure that we did not have sabotage. They made sure that we put the word out about taking care of your equipment. It was very obvious everything went into war production. That meant if you didn't take care of your equipment, you weren't going to get any new stuff. You had to keep the stuff that you had up to date. So that's an example of a poster. This is a reduced size. That was a much larger poster. That's an example. They made barrels for cannons. It didn't make any difference whether it was war effort or on the farm. It was all war effort. Civil defense. Civil defense, of course, very important during that era. Thank heavens we never actually had any need for it here in our country, but it could have happened. Here's a couple pictures of some of the troops that were made up. These units were made up of individuals that had been employees for International Harvester. There were two particular battalions that were made up specifically of these people. And one of the pictures here shows a group of guys from 40 different states in the Union. I happen to know that the generator that went into the B-29 that loaded the bomb on Enola Day was made from International Harvester. I talked to a gentleman whose dad was on that sister ship that provided that generator so they could light it up to load that bomb at night. In secrecy, of course, so they could load it up and then fly that to Japan and drop the bomb. I mean, it just goes on. Dump trucks. Example of a lady called a tank. She was called a tractorette who learned to take over the job on the farm. Here she is riding a crawler. And that's on the family farm, or it was actually a ranch that she was on. But she had to take over the responsibility because all the males were in the service. Mm-hmm. And if they called the gals that took over those jobs and were trained to do that, they would call them tractorettes. And of course, that's all associated with international arms. Example of the M4 Sherman tank that was made out of Bettendorf over in the Quad City area. Iowa, in that Four Corner area. Women riding on a pickup truck. These are Coast Guard women. These are the women that ran up and down the coast and made sure that we didn't have submarines coming in on the coast. And that's just an example of that. They happened to be here with this lucky male chief who gets a chance to send her. Of course, he's smiling from ear to ear, of course, that he's got this group of women.
You ain't leaving all this stuff, are you? Okay.
And
I don't know about Dave.
Here's a tank that was they did the research, development, and then the
manufacturing?
Yeah, well, there you go. Yep. Of the thing. Although this particular tank did not go into production, they only made 7 of these that went to the military. There were many of these tanks that were made where they actually did the research and development on, but it just didn't happen to go into production. Guess what? The war came to an end, so they didn't follow up on it. But that's an example. It's called the M7 is the name of it. Marines. Loads of Marines on International Harvester trucks on the way to the range to learn how to shoot their rifles. Just a typical example of the involvement of International Harvester. So you look at it, you see all the things that are here. I mean, I can't cover all of the trucks that were used by from International Harvester. There was just so many of them. But that's a typical example of just an overview, shall we say.
Well,
And
I think-
National Harvester did World War II. So I've been proud to be involved in doing this thing here. It's really been a fantastic thing for me. So learning experience, and I'll guarantee I'm going to do more research on it and know more about this, let's say next year. Okay?
All right. Thanks, David.